Hi guys, welcome to a session of Percy Jackson Read Aloud. The last time we read, a lot of things got solved. So Percy was able to return the lightning bolt. He was also able to return Hades's helm. He was in Olympus with his father and Zeus, who was his uncle, for a while. At first, he didn't feel much from his father, but then in the end, he said a couple of things that actually made him feel like he was actually his son. Zeus forgives him for the trouble that he's caused, but truthfully, he wasn't a troublemaker, of course. And Poseidon tells him to remember that he's always the son of the ocean god. Then he goes back to New York City, and turns out his mother is back because since he returned Hades' helm, then he also kept his part of the promise and returned his mom home. Of course, she's back home with Smelly Gabe, and Percy is not happy about that. He decides that he is going back to Camp Half Blood, and when he gets to his room, there is a package there that looks very familiar with his own handwriting that was being sent to the Olympus. And then he figures out that in that box is Medusa's head. And he tells his mom that if she ever needs protection from Smelly Gabe, she should use that box against him. Percy goes away, and that is where the last chapter ends. We are actually going to start reading what I believe is the last chapter of the book. Okay, so let's see if we have time to finish today, and if not, I'll do one more read aloud on Monday, okay? Chapter 22, The Prophecy Comes True. We were the first heroes to return alive to Half-Blood Hill since Luke. So, of course, everybody treated us as if we'd won some reality TV contest. According to camp tradition, we wore laurel wreaths to a big feast prepared in our honor. Then led a procession down to the bonfire, where we got to burn the burial shrouds our cabins had made for us in our absence. Annabeth's shroud was so beautiful, gray silk with embroidered owls. I told her it seemed ashamed not to bury her in it. She punched me and told me to shut up. Being the son of Poseidon, I didn't have any cabin mates, so the Ares cabin had volunteered to make my shroud. They'd taken an old bedsheet and painted smiley faces with X'd out eyes around the border, and the word loser painted really big in the middle. It was fun to burn. As Apollo's cabin let the sing along and passed out s'mores, I was surrounded by my old Hermes cabin mates, Annabeth's friends from Athena, and Grover's hater buddies, who were admiring the brand new searcher's license he'd received from the Council of Cloven Elders. The council had called Grover's performance on the quest brave to the point of indigestion. Horns and whiskers above anything that we have seen in the past. The only ones not in a party mood were Clarice and her cabin mates, whose poisonous looks told me they'd never forgive me for disgracing their dad. That was okay with me. Even Dionysus' welcome home speech wasn't enough to dampen my spirit. Yes, so the little brat didn't get himself killed, and now he'll have an even bigger head. Well, huzzah for that. In other announcements, there will be no canoe races this Saturday. I moved back into cabin 3, but it didn't feel so lonely anymore. I had my friends to train with during the day. At night, I lay awake and listened to the sea, knowing my father was out there. Maybe he wasn't quite sure about me yet. Maybe he hadn't even wanted me born, but he was watching. And so far, he was proud of what I'd done. As for my mother, she had a chance at a new life. Her letter arrived a week after I got back to camp. She told me Gabe had left mysteriously, disappeared off the face of the planet, in fact. She'd reported him missing to the police, but she had a funny feeling they would never find him. On a completely unrelated subject, she told her first life-size concrete sculpture. On a completely unrelated subject, she'd sold her first life-size concrete sculpture entitled The Poker Player to a collector through an art gallery in Soho. She'd gotten so much money for it, she'd put a deposit down on a new apartment and made a payment to her first semester tuition at NYU. The Soho Gallery was clamoring for more of her work, which they called a huge step forward in super ugly neorealism. But don't worry, my mom wrote. I'm done with sculpture. I've disposed of that box of tools you left me. It's time for me to turn to writing. At the bottom, she wrote, P.S. Percy, I've found a good private school here in the city. I've put a deposit down to hold you a spot, in case you want to enroll for 7th grade. You could leave at home, but if you want to go year-round at Half-Blood Hill, I'll understand. I folded the note carefully and set it on my bedside table. Every night before I went to sleep, I read it again, and I tried to decide how to answer her. On the 4th of July, the whole camp gathered at the beach for a firework display by Cabin 9. Being Hephaestus's kids, they weren't going to settle for a few lame red, white, and blue explosions. They'd anchored a barge offshore and loaded it with rockets the size of Patriot missiles. According to Annabeth, who'd seen the show before, the blasts would be sequenced so tightly they'd look like frames of animation across the sky. The finale was supposed to be a couple of 100-foot tall Spartan warriors who would crackle to life above the ocean, fight a battle, and then explode into a million colors. As Annabeth and I were spreading a picnic blanket, Grover showed up to tell us goodbye. He was dressed in his usual jeans and t-shirt and sneakers, but in the last few weeks, he'd started to look older, almost high school age. His goatee had gotten thicker. He'd put on some weight. His horns had grown at least an inch, so he now had to wear his Rasta cap all the time to pass as a human. I'm off, he said. I just came to say, well, you know. I tried to feel happy for him. After all, it wasn't every day a satyr got permission to go look for the great god Pan. But it was hard saying goodbye. I'd only known Grover a year, yet he was my oldest friend. Annabeth gave him a hug. She told him to keep his fake feet on. I asked him where he was going to search first. Kind of a secret, he said, looking embarrassed. I wish you could come with me, guys, but humans and Pan, we understand, Annabeth said. You got enough tin cans for the trip? Yeah. And you remembered your reed pipes? Geez, Annabeth, he grumbled. You're like an old mama goat. But he didn't really sound annoyed. He gripped his walking stick and slung a backpack over his shoulder. He looked like any hitchhiker you might see on an American highway. Nothing like that little runty boy I used to defend from bullies at Yancey Academy. Well, he said, wish me luck. He gave Annabeth another hug. He clapped me on the shoulder and then headed back through the dunes. Fireworks exploded to life overhead. Hercules killing the Nemean lion, Artemis chasing the boar, George Washington, who by the way was a son of Athena, crossing the Delaware. Hey Grover, I called. He turned at the edge of the woods. Wherever you're going, I hope they make good enchiladas. Grover grinned, and then he was gone, the trees closing around him. We'll see him again, Annabeth said. I tried to believe it. The fact that no searcher had ever come back in 2,000 years, well, I decided not to think about that. Grover would be the first. He had to be. July passed. I spent my days devising new strategies for the capture the flag and making alliances with the other cabins to keep the banner out of Ares' hands. I got to the top of the climbing wall for the first time without getting scorched by lava. From time to time, I'd walk past the big house, glance up at the attic windows, and think about the oracle. I tried to convince myself that its prophecy had come to completion. You shall go west and face the god who has turned. Been there, done that. Even though the traitor god had turned out to be Ares rather than Hades. You'll find out what was stolen and see it safe returned. Check. One master bowl delivered, one helm of darkness back in Hades' oily head. You shall be betrayed by one who calls you a friend. This line still bothered me. Ares had been pretending to be my friend and then betrayed me. That must be what the oracle meant. And you shall fail to save what matters most in the end. I had failed to save my mom, but only because I'd let her save herself. And I knew that was the right thing. So why was I still uneasy? The last night of the summer session came all too quickly. The campers had one last meal together. We burned part of our dinner for the gods. At the bonfire, the senior counselors awarded the end of summer beads. I got my own leather necklace, and when I saw the bead for my first summer, I was glad the firelight covered my blushing. The design was pitch black, with a sea green trident shimmering in the center. The choice was unanimous, Luke announced. This bead commemorates the first son of the sea god at this camp, and the quest he undertook into the darkest parts of the underworld to stop a war. The entire camp got to their feet and cheered. Even the Ares' cabin felt obliged to stand. Athena's cabin steered Annabeth to the front so that she could share in the applause. I'm not sure I'd ever felt as happy or as sad as I did in that moment. I'd finally found a family, people who cared about me and thought I'd done something right. And in the morning, most of them would be leaving for the entire year. The next morning, I found a form letter on my bedside table. I knew Dionysus must have filled it out because he stubbornly insisted on getting my name wrong. Dear Peter Johnson, if you intend to stay at Camp Half-Blood year-round, you must inform the big house by noon today. If you do not announce your intentions, we will assume you have vacated your cabin or died a horrible death. Cleaning harpies will work at sundown. They will be authorized to eat any unregistered campers. All personal articles left behind will be incinerated in the lava pit. Have a nice day, Mr. D. Dionysus. Camp Director, Olympian Council Number 12. That's another thing about ADHD. Deadlines aren't just real to me. Until I'm staring one in the face. Summer was over and I still hadn't answered my mother or the camp about whether I'd be staying. Now I had only a few hours to decide. The decision should have been easy. I mean, 9 months of hero training or 9 months of sitting in a classroom. Duh. But there was my mom to consider. For the first time, I had the chance to live with her for the whole year without Gabe. I had a chance to be at home and knock around the city in my free time. I remembered what Annabeth had said so long ago in our quest. The real world is where the monsters are. That's where you learn whether you're any good or not. I thought about the fate of Thalia, daughter of Zeus. I wondered how many monsters would attack me if I left Half-Blood Hill. If I stayed in one place for a whole school year without Chiron or my friends around to help me, would my mother and I survive until the next summer? That was assuming the spelling tests and 5-paragraph essays didn't kill me first. I decided I'd go down to the arena and do some sword practice. Maybe that would clear my head. The campgrounds were mostly deserted, shimmering in the August heat. All the campers were in their cabins, packing up or running around with brooms and mops, getting ready for the final inspection. Argus was helping some of the Aphrodite kids haul their Gucci suitcases and makeup kits over the hill, where the camp's shuttle bus would be waiting to take them to the airport. Don't think about leaving yet, I told myself. Just train. I got to the sword fighters arena and found that Luke had the same idea. His gym bag was plopped at the edge of the stage. He was working solo, wailing on battle dummies with a sword I'd never seen before. It must have been a regular steel blade because he was lashing the dummies' heads right off, stabbing through their straw-stuffed guts. His orange counselor's t-shirt was dripping with sweat. His expression was so intense, his life might have really been in danger. I watched, fascinated, as he disemboweled the whole row of dummies, hacking off limbs and basically reducing them to a pile of straw and armor. There were only dummies, but I couldn't help being awed by Luke's skill. The guy was an incredible fighter. It made me wonder again how he possibly could have failed at his quest. Finally, he saw me and stopped mid swing. Percy. Sorry, I said, embarrassed. It's okay, he said, lowering his sword. Just doing some last minute practice. Those dummies won't be bothering anybody anymore. Luke shrugged. We build new ones every summer. Now that his sword wasn't swirling around, I could see something odd about him. The blade, no, about it. The blade was two different types of metal, one edge bronze and the other steel. Luke noticed me looking at it. Oh, this? New toy. This is backbitter. Backbitter. Luke turned the blade in the light so it glinted wickedly. One side is celestial bronze, the other is tempered steel. Works on mortals and immortals both. I thought about what Chiron had told me when I started my quest, that a hero should never harm mortals unless absolutely necessary. I didn't know they could make a weapon like that. They probably can't, Luke agreed. It's one of a kind. He gave me a tiny smile and then slid the sword into its scabbard. Listen, I was going to come looking for you. What do you say we go down to the woods one last time? Look for something to fight. I don't know why I hesitated. I should have felt relieved that Luke was being so friendly. Ever since I'd gotten back from the quest, he'd been acting a little distant. I was afraid. He might resent me for all the attention I'd gotten. You think it's a good idea? I asked. Oh, come on. He rummaged his gym bag and pulled out a 6-pack of Cokes. Drinks are on me. I stared at the Cokes, wondering where the heck he'd gotten them. There were no regular mortal sodas at the camp store. No way to smuggle them in unless you talked to a satyr, maybe. Of course, the magic dinner goblets would fill with anything you want, but it just didn't taste the same as the real Coke straight out of the can. Sugar and caffeine, my willpower crumbled. Sure, I decided. Why not? We walked down to the woods and kicked around for some kind of monster to fight, but it was too hot. All the monsters with any sense must have been taking siestas in their nice cool caves. We found a shady spot by the creek where I'd broken Clarice's spear during my first Capture the Flag game. We sat on a big rock, drank our Cokes, and watched the sunlight in the woods. After a while, Luke said, You miss being on a quest? With monsters attacking me every 3 feet? Are you kidding? Luke raised an eyebrow. Yeah, I miss it, I admitted. You? A shadow passed over his face. I was used to hearing from the girls how good-looking Luke was, but at that moment, he looked weary and angry and not at all handsome. His blonde hair was gray in the sunlight. The scar on his face looked deeper than usual. I could imagine him as an old man. I've lived at Half-Blood Hill year-round since I was 14, he told me. Ever since Talia, well, you know. I trained and trained and trained. I never got to be a normal teenager out there in the real world. Then they threw me on one quest, and when I came back, it was like, okay, ride's over, have a nice life. He crumpled his Coke can, threw it in the creek, which really shocked me. One of the first things you learn at Camp Half-Blood is don't litter. You'll hear from the nymphs and the naiads. They'll get even. You'll crawl into bed one night and find your sheets filled with centipedes and mud. The heck with laurel wreaths, Luke said. I'm not going to end up like those dusty trophies in the big house attic. You make it sound like you're leaving. Luke gave me a twisted smile. Oh, I'm leaving all right, Percy. I brought you down here to say goodbye. He snapped his fingers. A small fire burned a hole in the ground at my feet. Out crawled something glistening black, about the size of my hand. A scorpion. I started to go out for my pen. I wouldn't, Luke cautioned. Pit scorpions can jump up to 15 feet. Its stinger can pierce right through your clothes. You'll be dead in 60 seconds. Luke, what? Then it hit me. You will be betrayed. My computer locked, I'm sorry. And then it hit me. You will be betrayed by one who calls you a friend. You, I said. He stood calmly and brushed off his jeans. The scorpion paid him no attention. It kept its beady eyes on me, clamping its pincers as it crawled into my shoe. I saw a lot out there in the world, Percy. Luke said. Didn't you feel it? The darkness gathering, the monsters growing stronger? Didn't you realize how useless it all is? All the heroics, being pawns of the gods? They should have overthrown thousands of years ago, but they've hung on thanks to us half-bloods. I couldn't believe this was happening. Luke, you're talking about our parents, I said. He laughed. That's supposed to make me love them? Their precious Western civilization is a disease, Percy. It's killing the world. The only way to stop it is to burn it to the ground. Start over with something more honest. You're as crazy as Ares. His eyes flared. Ares is a fool. He never realized the true master he was serving. If I had time, Percy, I could explain, but I'm afraid you won't live that long. And that's all we have time for. I will finish the book on Monday.